Some stories end quietly, not with answers, but with understanding. Claire learned that silence can protect, but it can also destroy. And when the truth finally found its way into the light, healing began, not just for her, but for every voice that had been forgotten. Maybe you have a silence too, a memory you've buried, a truth you've never dared to speak. Let this story remind you, it's never too late to listen, and never too late to forgive. You've been listening to Voices of Auntie Donna, where stories speak to the heart and truth finds its voice. If this story touched you, please subscribe. Because here, every story is a heartbeat, and maybe the next one will sound like yours. Until next time, take care of your truth, and keep listening to the quiet. It rained the morning we buried my mother. The kind of rain that doesn't cleanse, just lingers. Soft, steady, and cold enough to make every word dissolve into mist. People said it was a blessing, that rain on a funeral day means the soul is at peace. But as I stood beneath my black umbrella, listening to the priest's voice blur against the patter of drops, all I could think about was how quiet it felt. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind. The kind that hums behind closed doors. The kind that fills a house where truth was never welcome. I hadn't been back to my mother's home in years. Not since that night. The night no one spoke about. The night my sister vanished. Even now, standing at the edge of her grave, the word sister felt heavy, unfamiliar on my tongue. People who knew us back then avoided saying her name, like it was cursed. Emily. The silence that followed her disappearance had stretched across decades, binding our family tighter than love ever had. My father died still pretending she'd run away. My mother spent the rest of her life dusting her picture frames, but never saying her name aloud. And now she was gone too. After the burial, I went alone to the house, that creaking colonial on the hill where I'd grown up, its white paint long surrendered to weather and time. Every room felt smaller, the air thicker, as if it remembered. Boxes lined the hallway, labeled in her careful handwriting. Kitchen, winter clothes, books. And then there was one box pushed far into the corner of the attic, unmarked, dusty, hidden beneath a yellowing quilt. When I lifted it, something rattled inside. The attic smelled of cedar and forgotten things. I set the box down on the old trunk near the window and peeled the tape back. Inside were photographs, black and white snapshots of us as children, faces grinning under summer light, unaware of the years that would swallow us whole. Beneath the photos was something heavier, a small rectangular cassette player. It was scratched, the metal edges dulled by age. A single cassette was inside with a label written in her familiar cursive. Play when I'm gone. For a long time I just stared at it. The attic light flickered. Outside the rain drummed harder, echoing through the beams. My pulse matched its rhythm. My mother wasn't sentimental. She didn't leave notes or tokens. She was the kind of woman who believed emotions were better kept folded away, like linens used only on holidays. So this was strange. I found a half-dead set of batteries in a drawer and pushed them into the recorder. The machine gave a soft whirring sound. I pressed play at first and only static. Then a click. And her voice, Claire, the sound of it nearly made my knees buckle. I hope you're alone when you hear this. There are things I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Things that we buried to survive. The tape hissed again, her breath shaky like she was crying but trying to steady herself. I need you to know what happened that night. The night Emily disappeared, I froze. My heart pounded in my throat. All my life, that night had been a locked door, sealed by grief and fear. I'd stopped asking questions when I realized no one would ever answer. Now, decades later, the lock was breaking. I lied to you, Claire. Her voice trembled. To protect you. But lies don't die. They only wait. There was another pause. The soft scrape of a chair, a quiet sob she didn't bother to hide. I told the police Emily ran away. That your father and I had argued with her about college and she left. But that wasn't true. She didn't run away. She was taken. The air in the attic changed. It felt heavier, as if even the walls leaned closer to listen. I didn't know what to do, she continued, her words tumbling fast now, desperate. He told me it was an accident, that he didn't mean to. He begged me to stay quiet, said no one would believe me if I spoke. The voice on the tape quivered. Hass, she never said who. But I already felt a cold suspicion creeping through me. Someone close, someone trusted. I rewound the tape, replayed that line, her voice cracking on the word, accident. The attic suddenly felt too small, too alive with ghosts. I stopped the recorder, staring at the machine like it might bite. Outside, thunder rolled low across the sky. If she had meant my father, it would have made sense. He'd been distant, controlling, prone to silence that could fill a room with dread. But she'd said he begged me to stay quiet, and the way she said it, there was fear in her tone I'd never heard before. Fear of someone else, someone she trusted, someone we all had trusted. I packed the recorder back in its box and locked the attic behind me. But even as I drove back to my apartment that night, the echo of her voice wouldn't leave me. She hadn't finished the confession. The tape had stopped mid-sentence, cut off before she named him. The words that haunted me most were her last ones before the silence. Claire, you must find the truth. He's still, then static, then nothing. The cassette clicked, rewound, and went quiet. That night, I didn't sleep. The rain kept falling, soft and endless, like the sky was trying to wash something away that never would be. For years I'd built my life on silence, just like she had. But now, I could feel the truth moving beneath the surface, restless, waiting. Somewhere in the dark corners of my memory, and this town, someone still held the missing piece. And for the first time since my sister vanished, I wasn't afraid to find it. That night I dreamt of rain. It filled every hallway of the old house, running down wallpaper and picture frames, seeping through the cracks in the floor. I followed the sound of dripping until I stood before the attic door again. On the other side, I could hear the faint hum of my mother's voice. The tape still playing, over and over, whispering the same unfinished words. When I woke, my pillow was damp, though I couldn't tell if it was sweat or tears. For 2 days, I tried to ignore the cassette. I told myself it was grief playing tricks, that my mother's guilt had twisted memory into confession. But every time I looked at the box in my living room, something inside me stirred, a restlessness I hadn't felt in years. I had lived most of my life avoiding the past, leaving our small town, changing my number, telling people I was an only child. But truth, I've learned, doesn't fade. It waits, patient and poisonous. On the third morning, I drove back to the house. The rain had stopped, leaving the yard soaked and shining under a thin veil of mist. The driveway still carried the impressions of funeral cars. I unlocked the front door, and that familiar smell, old paper, lavender, and wood polish, met me like an old ache. Every corner seemed to hold a memory. The couch where Emily and I used to lie reading magazines, the banister she'd slide down, laughing until Mother would shout her name. Emily. The name still felt dangerous to speak aloud. I walked to the living room. The same photographs hung on the wall, their frames neatly dusted, perfectly aligned. My mother's orderliness had survived even after she didn't. But one picture drew my attention. A family portrait, taken the summer before Emily disappeared. We were standing in the garden, sunlight pouring over us. My father's arm around Mother's waist, Emily's smile, wide and bright, her hand resting on my shoulder. Behind us stood someone else, just out of focus. At first I assumed it was a shadow, a trick of light. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. The faint outline of a man, standing near the garden gate. Someone who shouldn't have been there. I lifted the frame from the wall, my fingers trembling. As I turned it over, something thin slipped from the back and landed on the floor. A photograph folded in half, tucked behind the picture. When I opened it, my stomach tightened. It was Emily, but not from that same day. She looked older, her hair slightly shorter, her smile unsure. And next to her stood him, Pastor Robert Hale, our family's trusted friend, the man who baptized us, who held my mother's hand when Father passed, who spoke at the funeral 2 days ago, his voice soft, reassuring, full of scripture and comfort. He looked younger in the photo, but his smile, that same gentle curve that always seemed too calm, was unmistakable. His hand rested lightly on Emily's shoulder. On the back of the photo, written in my mother's handwriting, he said he'd protect her. The air in the room turned cold. I sat down on the couch, the tape recorder in my lap. My mother's voice echoed in my head. He told me it was an accident, that he didn't mean to. I pressed play again. Static. Then her trembling tone returned. He said she fell, that there was nothing he could do, but I saw the bruise on her neck, the way he avoided my eyes. I wanted to go to the police, but he reminded me of all the good he'd done, the church, the community. He said people like him don't get accused, and if I spoke, I'd destroy more than one life. Then a click. The tape stopped. I felt sick. My mother had protected him. I stared at the photograph again. Emily's eyes, open but dim, like she was already carrying a secret she couldn't tell. Outside, the sky had begun to darken again. Clouds moving in like slow grief. I took the photograph, slipped it into my pocket, and left. The drive to the church felt longer than I remembered. The roads had changed, new stores, fresh asphalt, but the steeple still rose above the trees like a blade. The parking lot was empty except for a single silver car I recognized instantly. Pastor Hale's. I didn't plan what I'd say. I just walked through the heavy doors, the scent of old wood and candle wax filling my lungs. The church was dim, stained glass light spilling across the pews in shards of color. He stood near the altar, his back to me, arranging hymnals. When he turned, his face softened with recognition. "Claire," he said, smiling. I didn't let him finish. "I found something," I said. "A tape." My mother's voice. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind his calm, a tightening around his jaw, a shadow in his eyes. "Ah," he said carefully. "Your mother was troubled toward the end. You mustn't take—" "She mentioned you," I interrupted. "She said Emily didn't run away." His expression didn't change, but his silence spoke louder than denial. "I think you should leave the past where it belongs, Claire," he said finally, his voice gentle, but sharp beneath the softness. "Your mother carried many burdens. It's not healthy to dig them up," I laughed, a brittle, shaking sound I barely recognized. "Funny, she said something like that too. But lies don't die, do they?" He stepped closer. "You're grieving. I understand how pain twists memory. Don't let it consume you." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "What did you do to her?" For a moment, his eyes darkened, the veneer of calm peeling back just enough to show what hid beneath. Then, as quickly, he smiled again. "I think you should go," he said softly, "before you regret coming here." I turned and walked out, but my legs felt weak. His words followed me like a chill. Outside, the wind had picked up. I could still see his silhouette framed by the stained glass, perfectly composed, saintly, as if nothing had ever cracked his holy surface. But something inside me had shifted. If my mother's tape was true, if he had taken Emily, if he had lied for decades, if the entire town had protected him because of his title, then silence had never been peace. It was complicity, and I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. That night I played the tape again, over and over, listening to the static between her words, wondering if she'd hidden more than one message. I searched through the rest of the attic boxes, desperate, until I found a small envelope tucked inside one of her old recipe books. It was addressed to me. Inside, a note in her shaky handwriting. "If you found the tape, you'll need to find the key too. Look where the truth began, the lake house. Be careful who you trust." I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. The lake house. The place where Emily was last seen. The place they said she'd left from. But now I knew better. She hadn't left. Something had happened there. And my mother, even from the grave, was guiding me back. I hadn't driven out to the lake in over 20 years. Back then, it was where summers began and ended. A place of laughter, mosquito bites, and sunburned skin. But after Emily disappeared, the lake house became something else. A place people spoke of softly, as though the wind there might still carry her name. Now, as I steered down the winding road through the pines, that old memory of sunlight and laughter felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The air was colder here, even in daylight. The lake spread wide and still, its surface glassy and gray beneath a ceiling of cloud. The house itself stood half hidden by overgrown ivy. The white siding faded to yellow, windows clouded by dust and time. I parked by the rotted dock and sat for a while, listening to the soft lapping of water against the shore. There was a kind of stillness here that felt alive, like the past hadn't left, only waited. When I finally stepped inside, the floor groaned under my weight. The air smelled of mildew and pine. Dust floated through the shafts of light that broke through the curtains. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The wooden chairs, the chipped coffee mugs, the half-faded calendar still hanging in the kitchen from 2001, the year Emily vanished. I traced my fingers over the walls as I walked, as though touch could bring memory into focus. The old photograph in my pocket, Emily with Pastor Hale, burned against my palm. I still couldn't shake the thought of my mother's words. He said it was an accident. In my mind, those words tangled with the smell of lake water, the echo of laughter, and the sound of a door slamming shut all those years ago. I reached the back room, Emily's old space. It faced the water, the window cracked open like it had never been fully closed. Dust covered the dresser, but something caught my eye. A faint line across the floorboards, where one plank sat slightly higher than the rest. I knelt. At first it looked ordinary, just an uneven board. But when I pressed gently, it shifted, revealing a hollow sound beneath. My breath caught. I found a small crowbar in the corner and pried it open. Inside was a tin box, rusted, its lid barely holding. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside lay a small silver locket, a cassette tape without a label, and a folded note. The note was written in Emily's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The looping, confident script I hadn't seen in decades. If you're reading this, it means Mom didn't destroy the tape. He said he'd ruin her if she told anyone. Said people like him don't fall. They rise. But he lied, Claire. He lied about everything. I tried to run that night, but he found me first. Please, if you ever find this, don't let him keep pretending he's a good man. My stomach twisted. The air felt thin. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the wave of nausea that came with each word. Then I looked at the unlabeled cassette. It was smaller, older, the kind you'd use for a handheld recorder, the kind he might have used for sermons, for private conversations. I carried it back to my car and slid it into the player on the dashboard. The tape clicked once, then began to hum with faint static, and then a voice. Not my mother's, not Emily's, his. Pastor Hale's calm, steady tone filled the car, that same polished warmth he used from the pulpit. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, he said. I lost control again. I didn't mean to hurt her. She kept saying no, that she'd tell someone. I tried to make her understand it wasn't what she thought. But she ran. She ran and she fell. I didn't mean to push her. I didn't mean to. The sound cracked. Static burst through. Then silence. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. It wasn't an accident. It was confession. He'd recorded himself. Maybe a private atonement, a moment of pride or madness, and my mother must have found it. She'd hidden it here, buried it beneath the floor, knowing it could destroy him. I hit stop and sat there, shaking. The lake stretched before me, endless, still, deceptive. He'd been right about one thing. People like him don't fall easily. They're protected by reputation, by the blindness of those who need their saints to stay spotless. But now, I had his voice. By the time I drove back into town, the sun was setting, turning the sky a strange color, blood orange fading into bruised purple. I parked outside the church. The lights were still on. I could see his shadow moving through the window of his office, slow and deliberate, like a man with no reason to hurry. I sat in the car, clutching the tape in my hand, my heart pounding. Every instinct told me to walk in, to confront him, to throw his own words in his face. But another part of me, quieter, steadier, told me to wait. People like him didn't crumble with truth alone. They needed witnesses. They needed light. So I went home. I opened my laptop. I searched for an old friend, one who now worked as a journalist at the County Herald. Her name was Anna Cruz. She'd covered the disappearance back then. She'd been young, relentless, and she never believed the runaway story. It took only one message. "Anna, it's Claire. I found something. It's about my sister," she called within minutes. "Claire, after all these years, what did you find?" I looked at the cassette on my desk, the label still blank. "Proof," I said quietly, "but I don't know how to use it." Her voice softened. "Then we'll use it together." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the dark, listening to the faint hum of the city below. Somewhere, beneath that stillness, truth was stirring. My mother had carried it to her grave. Emily had tried to leave it behind, and now it was mine to finish. Before dawn, I played the tape once more. Not because I wanted to hear his voice again, but to remind myself of what silence costs. Each word was a wound. Each pause, a memory of every family who trusted him. And as the sun broke through the blinds, I whispered a promise I meant to keep. "You may have buried her, but I'll bury your lies." The following morning, the sky was the color of ash. Thin fog clung to the streets like breath on glass, and the church bell echoed through it. 1, 2, 3 tolls, calling a congregation that had no idea what was coming. I sat in the car outside, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. In the seat beside me lay the cassette, sealed now in a small plastic bag, as if truth needed protection from the air. Anna was late, but I didn't mind. The quiet gave me space to think, or rather, to try not to. The church looked almost beautiful in that dim light, the stained glass glinting with shards of blue and red. But beauty, I'd learned, often hid rot beneath its paint. When Anna finally arrived, she looked the same as I remembered. Sharp eyes, tired smile, the kind of woman who saw through walls. She slid into the passenger seat, glancing at the bag between us. "That it?" she asked softly. I nodded. She exhaled. "Let's hear it." I hesitated. It's not easy to listen to. Truth rarely is. So I pressed play. The sound of static filled the car first, then his voice. Smooth, composed, carrying that same rhythm of piety that once made people trust him without question. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Anna's hand went to her mouth. By the time it ended, her face had gone pale. She sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the engine the only sound between us. Then she whispered, "You realize what this means, don't you?" "I do." "He'll deny it, of course. He'll say it's fabricated, taken out of context." I turned to her. "That voice, it's him, Anna, you know it. The whole town does." She met my eyes. "Then we'll make them listen." That afternoon, we sat in her small office at the Herald. It smelled of ink and stale coffee, papers stacked like fortresses around her desk. She played the tape again through her computer, recording every second, isolating every sound. He confessed. she said quietly, pausing on the line where his voice cracked. Even if he tried to hide behind theology, it's still a confession. We worked until the sun dipped low behind the courthouse, rewriting the story that had been buried 24 years ago. By the time I left, I felt both lighter and terrified. Truth, when it begins to surface, carries its own kind of violence. Quiet, unstoppable. The next morning, the headline hit the town like a storm. Local pastor accused in 2001 disappearance. The article didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. The phone began to ring before sunrise. Calls from neighbors, from reporters, from people who used to send Christmas cards. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the morning light spill across the street. Somewhere out there, he was reading it too. By noon, his lawyer had released a statement. An outrageous fabrication by a grieving woman seeking attention. The church board stood by him. His followers flooded social media with prayers and defenses, quoting scripture about forgiveness and false witnesses. But Anna was right. People were listening. For the first time, silence wasn't the only sound in this town. That evening, I returned to the church. The front doors were unlocked, the lights dim. Inside, it smelled of incense and rain-damp wood. I walked slowly down the aisle, the echo of my footsteps ringing in the vast, hollow space. He was there, at the altar, head bowed, hands clasped. The image of repentance. When he looked up, his expression didn't surprise me. Not anger, not guilt, amusement, Claire, he said softly, almost kindly. You've caused quite the commotion. I stood at the base of the steps. You recorded yourself, he smiled faintly. Everyone sins, my dear, but you've misunderstood what that recording was. It's your voice. It's my confession, taken from a sermon I never finished. I spoke of sin in metaphor, of temptation and guilt, but you and your friend twisted it. His tone was calm, almost pitying. You always had a dramatic imagination, he continued. I told your mother the same. She used to come here, you know, after Emily disappeared. She'd cry for hours, and I'd pray for her. That kind of grief can destroy a mind. The words cut through me like glass. You're lying, I whispered. He stepped closer, the soft click of his shoes echoing in the silence. Am I? Or are you rewriting tragedy to make sense of loss? For a moment, doubt flickered in me, just a flash of it, cruel and uninvited. He was good at this, always had been. The tone that soothed, the gaze that disarmed. Then I remembered Emily's handwriting. He lied about everything. I met his eyes. Your voice will destroy you. He smiled again, slow and unshaken. Voices can be silenced. I turned and walked out before I could shake. My fingers trembled as I pushed open the heavy door. The night air hit me like release. Outside, I saw something. A flicker of movement across the street. Someone watching from a parked car. I blinked, and they were gone. When I got home, my apartment door was ajar. The air inside felt wrong, disturbed. The drawer where I'd kept the tape's copy was open. Empty. My hands went cold. I checked the others, the kitchen, the bedroom. Drawers half pulled, paper scattered, nothing stolen except the tape. A single note lay on my coffee table. No name. Just words written in thick, dark ink. Truth doesn't set everyone free. I sat down, trembling. He knew. He'd always known how to make silence look holy, but this time, he'd underestimated one thing. I wasn't my mother. And I wasn't alone anymore. I still had Anna. I still had the article, and I still had his voice, because Anna had already backed up the file. He could take my copy, but he couldn't bury what had already begun. That night, the church caught fire. Flames tore through the roof, devouring stained glass and pews, turning scripture into ash. The town gathered in stunned silence, watching their holy sanctuary burn. They said it was faulty wiring. They said no one was inside, but I knew better, because when the first siren screamed through the night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Let it end, Claire. God forgives. Men do not. And as I stared at the flames reflected in my window, I realized this wasn't just about my sister anymore. It was about every truth this town had chosen not to hear. The morning after the fire, the world smelled of smoke and rain. Claire stood at the edge of the old property, wrapped in her late mother's wool coat, watching as the fire crew sifted through what was left of Richard Harper's abandoned house. The air was thick with damp ash, curling around her like ghosts that refused to rest. The fire had started just hours after she'd left the place the night before. The same house she'd broken into, the same room where she'd found Lily's hair ribbon, sealed in a dusty box beneath the floorboards. Now, that house was gone, blackened wood and molten metal, collapsed into itself like it had finally given up keeping secrets. The chief spoke to her gently, his voice muffled through the haze. Electrical fault, most likely, he said. Old wiring. Nothing suspicious. Claire only nodded. But she knew better. The timing was too perfect. Someone had wanted that house, and everything in it, erased. She drove home in silence. The roads were empty, slick with rain, lined with trees that seemed to whisper as she passed. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Every turn of the tires felt like a heartbeat dragging her closer to something she wasn't ready to face. When she reached her mother's house, she didn't go inside right away. She sat in the driveway, staring at the attic window, the one that still glowed faintly with morning light. It looked different now, less like a storage space, more like a watchful eye. That was where it had all begun. The tape, the letter, the unraveling, and there was still one more tape she hadn't played. The one she'd found at the very bottom of the cedar chest, its label faded beyond legibility. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The faintest trace of her mother still lingered, like memory refusing to let go. Claire climbed the stairs to the attic, each step an echo of her heartbeat. The morning light slanted through the small window, scattering across the dust in pale golden beams. The tape recorder waited on the floor where she had left it. The first tape, Lily, the truth, sat beside it like an old confession already spoken. The second one felt heavier in her hand, its plastic casing warm, as though it remembered what it carried. She pressed play, the hiss of static. A breath, then her mother's voice, fainter now, older, like it came from a place beyond this world. Claire, if you've come this far, I need you to know something I never told anyone. Not the police, not even your father. Her voice cracked. The night of the fire at Richard's house wasn't the first one. Claire's pulse quickened. He didn't disappear like we said. I saw him again, years later. He came to me begging for forgiveness. He said he'd found God. He said he'd changed. A long pause. A shaky breath. I told him I couldn't forgive him, that forgiveness wasn't mine to give. He started crying. Said Lily's death was an accident, that she had fallen, that he panicked. But then he said something that broke me, Claire. He said she wasn't alone when it happened. The tape cracked, distorted by time. There was another man there that night, someone who helped him cover it up. Someone you knew. Claire felt her throat tighten. Her vision blurred. I didn't believe him at first, but when I looked through your father's things after he died, I found a letter, a payment, signed in Richard's name. Your father knew. He helped him disappear. He thought he was protecting us from scandal, from grief, from shame. He chose silence over justice. The air around her seemed to collapse. Her father, the man who had taught her about right and wrong, who had kept the Bible by his bed, who had made her promise to forgive and forget. He hadn't been protecting them. He'd been protecting himself. Claire's hand trembled as the tape continued. I burned the letter, Evelyn said. I couldn't bear it. But the truth stayed. It always does. That's why I kept the tapes, so that one day when you were strong enough, you could end it, find Lily's remains. Give her the peace I never could. A soft sob escaped from the recorder, her mother's. Then faintly, as if she were whispering directly into Claire's ear, the answer is in the ashes. The place he said she fell, behind the oak tree, where the ground still smells like smoke. The tape clicked, then fell silent. Claire sat frozen, the recorder still humming quietly in her lap. Her heart was pounding, her skin cold. Outside, a crow cawed, sharp and lonely, cutting through the morning stillness. Behind the oak tree, the one that stood near the ruins of Richard Harper's home, the ground still smelling of smoke. Her mother's last words weren't metaphor. They were directions. By evening, the world had turned to gold. The fire crew was gone, the property sealed off, a thin ribbon of yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. Claire stepped carefully through the soot and debris, her boots sinking into soft, wet ash. She reached the old oak. Its branches stretched wide, skeletal against the setting sun. Beneath it, the ground was darker, scorched deeper than the rest. She knelt, pushing aside the charred remains of leaves. Her hands found something, cold, unyielding. A small tin box, warped by heat but still intact. Inside, beneath layers of dirt and ash, were bone fragments wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. And beneath them a photograph, 2 girls smiling at the edge of a summer lake. Claire and Lily. On the back, written in her mother's handwriting. For the day the silence ends. The wind rose, carrying the smell of rain and smoke across the field. Claire pressed the photograph to her chest, eyes burning. Her mother had tried to protect her. Her father had tried to bury the truth. And Lily. Lily had waited all these years in silence. Claire closed the box, her hands steady for the first time in days. The ashes had given her answers. Now, it was time to give Lily peace. She stood beneath the oak tree as the sky darkened, whispering to the wind. A promise that the silence would end with her. By the time Claire reached the town of Hollow Creek, dusk had begun to settle over the hills like a slow exhale. The road wound through stretches of farmland and forgotten gas stations. each mile carrying her further from the version of herself she once knew. The daughter who believed her family's silence was born from sorrow, not sin. Now she knew better. Silence had been protection, and protection had been a lie. The town hadn't changed much since her childhood. The same water tower, the same diner with the flickering neon sign that still read "Eats," as if appetite were eternal. But the people were different, older, wearier. Their eyes followed her car as it passed, the way small towns always watch outsiders, even when the outsider is one of their own returning home. She pulled into the gravel lot behind the sheriff's office, her tires crunching softly. The building looked smaller than she remembered. White siding now turned gray with time. The flag above it faded from sun and neglect. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old paper. The clerk behind the desk glanced up, his brow furrowing slightly. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Claire offered a faint smile. "I'm looking for any old records tied to Richard Harper. He used to teach at Hollow Creek High. There was a disappearance. My sister." The man paused, fingers hovering above his keyboard. "That was what, 20 years ago?" 23. He hesitated, then typed something slowly, eyes scanning the screen. Most of those files were archived off-site. Some might have been destroyed in the old storage flood back in '08. Claire's stomach dropped. "Destroyed?" He shrugged. "Not all. You might try the library. Local paper archives." The Hollow Creek Public Library stood at the edge of town, a brick building wrapped in ivy, its tall windows still glowing faintly through the evening mist. Claire remembered coming here with Lily. The two of them sprawled on the carpet, whispering behind stacks of mystery novels, their laughter echoing softly through the aisles. Now the library smelled of dust and old memories. She found the microfilm reader tucked in the back corner and began scrolling through rolls of local newspapers from the 1990s. The rhythmic click of the machine filled the silence, punctuated by the hum of the fluorescent light above. Her. Local teacher resigns amid. Scandal. Search continues for missing. Student. Mother pleads for privacy. Each headline was a wound reopening. But then something new. A small article buried deep in the archives, dated 3 years after Lily's disappearance. Local resident Richard Harper declared deceased in absentia. Court filing initiated by Edward Monroe. Edward Monroe. Her father. Claire stared at the page, her hands trembling. Why would her father, her moral compass, her steadfast protector, file to have Richard declared dead? Unless he knew where Richard truly was. Outside, night had fallen fully. The moonlight turned the streets into silver ribbons. Claire stepped out into the chill, her breath visible, her mind racing. Every answer only deepened the labyrinth. She drove past her old neighborhood, the church, the post office, the house she and Lily once called home. The windows were dark now, curtains drawn, and then she saw it. At the corner of Maple and Ridge stood the Monroe family home, her grandparents' old property, long abandoned after her father's death. But the gate was open, and there was light inside. Claire parked down the street and approached quietly. The night air smelled faintly of burning wood, a fireplace maybe, or something older. She peered through the window. Inside, the living room was almost exactly as she remembered it. Framed family photos still hanging on faded wallpaper. The piano sitting silent against the far wall. But someone had been there recently. Footprints in the dust, a coat draped over the chair, a lantern glowing softly beside the old photo albums. She stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under her shoes, and there, sitting on the mantel, was another cassette tape, labeled in familiar handwriting. Edward, confession. Her father's name. The edges of her vision blurred. She reached out, touched the label. Her mother must have found it long ago and hidden it. Or maybe someone else had brought it here, waiting for her to discover it. She slipped the tape into her coat pocket, her heart thundering. Then a noise. A shuffle upstairs. She froze. Hello? She called softly. No answer. Only the faint thud of footsteps retreating into silence. She moved carefully, eyes on the staircase, every instinct on edge. But by the time she reached the landing, the noise was gone. The window at the end of the hall was open, curtains blowing gently in the cold wind. Whoever had been there was gone. Back in her car, she sat in silence, the tape in her hand. The rain began to fall again, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the windshield. The label stared back at her, her father's name, written in his own precise, familiar handwriting, Edward Monroe. The man who taught her to always tell the truth, the man her mother said helped bury it. She pressed the tape to her chest, whispering to the empty night. Whatever you did, Dad. I'm ready to know. When she got home, the fire had gone out. The house was dark except for the small lamp by the couch. She sat down, placed the cassette in the recorder, and hit play, a low hum. The static hiss of age, then her father's voice, steady, but burdened. If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't make it right. I tried, Claire. God knows I tried. But some sins don't die. They just wait for someone brave enough to dig them up. A pause. A breath. Your mother didn't lie. I helped Harper disappear. I thought I was saving us from scandal, from ruin, but I was saving him from justice. I told myself I was protecting you both. But I was a coward, and cowards don't deserve peace. Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. If you want to find where he truly went, you'll need to go back to where it began. Hollow Creek High. Room 212. I left something behind in the floorboards. Something that should have been handed to the police years ago. The tape clicked off. Claire sat motionless, her heart pounding in the dark. The school, room 212. Outside, the storm grew louder, the wind pressing against the windows as if urging her forward. She wiped her tears, reached for her car keys, and whispered, "This ends tonight." The wind howled through Hollow Creek High like a memory refusing to die. The school had been shut down years ago, condemned after the roof collapse in the East Wing. But to Claire, it looked exactly as it had in her nightmares. Rows of broken windows staring out like hollow eyes, the faint metallic creak of the old flagpole whispering secrets to the night. She parked beneath the flickering street lamp, her headlight sweeping across the faded school sign. Hollow Creek High School, home of the Hawks. The words were almost invisible now, peeled away by time and weather. As she stepped out, the gravel crunched under her boots. The air smelled of wet leaves and rust. In her coat pocket, the cassette from her father felt heavier than before, as though his guilt had weight. She found a side door, half torn from its hinges. The lock was long gone. When she pushed it open, the echo traveled down the empty hall like a heartbeat trapped inside the walls. Claire's flashlight beam cut through the dark. Desks overturned, lockers gaping open like broken mouths. Posters still clung to the walls. Prom night, April 1999. Science fair, sign up today. Every corner was layered with dust, every sound sharper than it should have been. And then a memory returned. Lily's laughter bouncing through these same halls, her voice calling back, "Hurry up, slowpoke." Claire stopped walking, eyes stinging. Her sister had vanished from this place, and now it was asking her to come back. Room 212. She remembered it instantly. The old literature room, Mr. Harper's room. The door was locked, but the wood was soft with age. One hard push and the latch gave way with a groan. The room smelled of mildew and rot. Moonlight spilled through the cracked window, illuminating rows of empty desks and a toppled bookshelf. Claire moved slowly, scanning the floorboards, her heart drumming. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "I left something behind in the floorboards." She knelt near the teacher's desk, brushing away years of dust. One plank near the corner was newer, slightly different wood, edges uneven. Someone had pried it up before and nailed it back hastily. Her hands trembled as she found a rusted screwdriver on the floor and began working the nails loose. Each one creaked like it was resisting her, as though the past itself didn't want to be uncovered. Finally, the board lifted free. Inside was a small weathered tin box. Claire pulled it out and set it on the desk. It was locked, but the metal had rusted thin. A few strikes with the screwdriver and the latch gave way. Inside were three things. Cassini. Blood-stained hair ribbon, lilies, a bee, faded photograph of her father and Richard Harper shaking hands outside the school, and an envelope. Yellowed, brittle, sealed with wax. On the front, in her father's handwriting, "For the truth that silence buried." Her pulse thundered in her ears as she opened it. Inside was a letter. Her father's confession in full. Edward Monroe. March 4th, 2002. The night Lily disappeared, she came to me crying. She said Harper had followed her after school, that he wanted to talk. She begged me not to tell your mother. She didn't want to cause trouble. I drove to the school that night, found his car parked by the gym, found him in this very room with Lily's ribbon in his hand. Claire's breath hitched. I lost myself. I don't remember the blow that stopped him, only the silence after. Lily was gone. He was breathing barely. I called your mother. She told me what to do. We buried him where the river bends behind the old sawmill. She said it was mercy. We thought no one would find him. But sin has a way of floating back to the surface. The paper slipped from Claire's fingers, fluttering to the dusty floor. Her father, her mother, both part of the same terrible truth. The silence wasn't protection. It was guilt, shared and sealed by love twisted into fear. A sound cut through the quiet. Footsteps. Claire froze, the flashlight shaking slightly in her hand. She turned toward the doorway. A shadow moved. "Who's there?" she called. Her voice wavered. No answer. Only the faint scrape of a shoe on the linoleum. Then, from the darkness, a man's voice. Low. Calm. Familiar. "You shouldn't have come back here, Claire." Her stomach dropped. She knew that voice. It couldn't be. She stepped forward, her beam catching his face. Older, thinner, but unmistakable. Richard Harper. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The silence between them was thick enough to choke on. Then he smiled. Your father thought he killed me. He didn't. He left me for dead, and your mother made sure no one looked for me. Claire's breath came shallow. You hurt my sister. He tilted his head. Did I? A slow grin crept across his face. Or did your parents need someone to blame for what really happened that night? She shook her head, backing away. No, don't. Your father killed the wrong man, Claire. He buried a secret he didn't understand. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the rain hammering the roof. What do you mean? She whispered. Harper stepped into the light. And in his hand was another cassette tape, labeled Lily, The Last Night. He placed it on the desk, the tape between them like a loaded weapon. You want the truth? He said softly. Then listened to her voice one last time. The tape sat between them like something alive, small, black, unassuming. But Claire could feel its pulse, as if the years sealed inside it were breathing again. Rain drummed on the roof of the abandoned school, slow and steady. Each drop sounded like time counting down. Harper's face glistened with damp sweat, the lines around his eyes carved deeper by years of hiding. You're lying, Claire whispered, though her voice faltered. My father's letter, he said. Harper's smile was thin, cruel. Your father was a desperate man. Guilt makes poets of us all. He pushed the cassette toward her, its plastic surface scraping against the desk. Play it. If you still believe him, play it. Her hands trembled as she took out her phone flashlight and searched for an old cassette player. There, half buried beneath a fallen chair, lay one, its handle broken, the buttons yellowed with age. The kind used for school announcements and drama rehearsals. It was absurd. After all the digital things she owned, the truth had chosen to hide on something this obsolete. She brushed off the dust, popped the tape in and pressed play. For a moment, nothing but static. Then a soft click and a voice. Faint, fragile, familiar. If anyone finds this. It's Lily. Claire's chest tightened. The sound was older than memory, yet instantly alive. I don't know what's happening anymore. Mr. Harper said he wanted to help me with the play, but he followed me after school. He said he knew secrets about Dad. A sharp intake of breath. Lily's. The sound of footsteps on wood. Dad's here. I can hear him arguing with Harper. He's shouting about Mom, about money, about... Oh, God. The sound wavered. A scuffle, a crash, and then Lily's sob. Stop. Please. Claire covered her mouth. Her own tears came hot and fast. The tape crackled again, softer now, like a whisper fading. If I don't come home. Tell Mom I know. Tell her I saw them that night at the river. I saw what they buried. I saw what they... And then the sound cut. Just static. End of tape. For a long, frozen minute, the only sound was the rain. Claire's vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was the tears or the fear. She turned to Harper, her voice breaking. What did you do to her? But Harper's expression wasn't smug now. It was unreadable, haunted. I didn't touch her, he said. I came back to school after your father left. She was gone, vanished. You're lying. I'm not, he snapped, voice cracking for the first time. Your mother came to see me the next morning. She begged me to leave town. Said if I stayed, I'd end up like Lily. That's when I knew. She wasn't protecting her daughter, she was protecting herself. Claire's knees nearly gave way. Her mother, "Tell Mom I know." The echo of Lily's last words stung like cold water. All those years her mother had sat by the window, eyes hollow, never speaking her daughter's name. Not because of grief, but because of shame. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Claire asked quietly. Harper laughed without humor. "Who would have believed me? Your father was the sheriff. Your mother the town saint. Me? Just a teacher with a bad reputation." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But you can change that, Claire. You can tell them what really happened." Her heart pounded against her ribs. "And what did really happen?" He leaned in, his breath cold and bitter. "Your mother killed her." The words sliced through her like broken glass. For a moment she couldn't move. "Couldn't breathe, no," she whispered. "You're trying to twist it." He nodded toward the tape player. "She said she saw what they buried. You think your father would have let that live? You think your mother would have let that secret breathe?" Claire stumbled back, shaking her head. It couldn't be. Her mother, the woman who hummed hymns while cooking, who kept fresh flowers on Lily's grave every week, who begged forgiveness every night. No. And yet, all those prayers, all that silence, was that guilt, not grief? She felt the air shift. Something deep inside her broke open, not in rage, but in terrible understanding. Harper was still speaking, his voice distant now, like thunder at the edge of a storm. "You've carried their lie long enough. End it. Tell the truth." But Claire wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes had locked on the tape player again, because as the static faded, there was another sound. Faint, almost lost beneath the hiss. A whisper. One last word, Mom, then silence. Claire fell to her knees, pressing her hand over her mouth, the sound echoing through her. Her sister's last breath, captured on a piece of plastic, replaying the wound her family had buried alive. She turned to Harper, but he was gone. Only the open door swayed gently in the wind. Rain poured through the broken window, soaking the desk, the tape, her trembling hands. The truth had finally spoken, and it wasn't finished yet, because there was still one voice missing. Her mother's, and suddenly, Claire knew exactly where to find it. The rain hadn't stopped since that night. It fell in long, steady sheets that blurred the town into watercolor shadows, familiar streets washed in gray. Claire drove in silence, the wipers rhythmically sweeping across the windshield. In the passenger seat lay the cassette tape, sealed in a Ziploc bag, and her father's letter folded carefully beside it. Together, they looked like evidence from a crime long forgotten, one her heart still refused to believe. The GPS lost signal miles before the edge of Hollow Creek, but she didn't need it. Her memory knew the road, the bends, the hollow sound of the tires over the old bridge where the creek met the mill stream. It was the same road her father had taken every morning for work, back when he wore his sheriff's badge with pride. And now, she followed it not as his daughter, but as his witness. The sawmill appeared through the mist, leaning and broken. Its roof collapsed like a tired old man bowing under his own years. Rusty blades hung from the rafters, motionless and slick with rain. Beyond it, the river wound through the trees, swollen with storm water, moving faster than she remembered. Its voice was louder now, rushing, whispering, roaring all at once. Claire pulled over and stepped out, boots sinking into the mud. The air was thick, smelling of moss and iron. She walked toward the water, past the broken fence, past the weeds that had swallowed the path. Every few feet she'd stop listening, as though expecting the river to speak, and then it did. A low creak echoed near the bend. She followed it, the sound pulling her closer until she reached the old tree line where the roots dipped into the current. There, half submerged in the soil, something jutted out. Wood. Rotten, but shaped. Not like driftwood. Like a box. Her pulse quickened. She knelt down, scraping at the mud with her bare hands. Rainwater soaked her sleeves, the cold biting into her skin, but she didn't care. Bit by bit, the shape emerged. An old chest, the kind used decades ago to store tools or paperwork. The lock had rusted away, the hinges brittle. She pulled. It resisted at first, then gave a long groan, surrendering its secret. Inside, wrapped in black plastic, were bones, and beneath them, a necklace, lilies. The same silver heart pendant her sister wore every day, the one their mother said had been lost. Claire staggered back, her throat closing. The world tilted. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Only rain, endless, merciless rain. Her father's words from the letter echoed through her. We buried him where the river bends. But this wasn't Harper's grave. This was Lily's. She fell to her knees, the mud clinging to her jeans, her hands shaking uncontrollably. And then she saw it. Something else buried under the lining of the chest. A small water-stained envelope sealed in wax. The wax bore a faint imprint, an M for Monroe, her mother's seal. Claire's fingers tore it open. Inside was a note, written in her mother's delicate cursive, words warped but legible. If you're reading this, the truth has come for us. I prayed you'd never have to, but prayers cannot undo what hands have done. Your father wanted to protect you both. He thought Harper was the monster. He was wrong. I was. Lily found the letters, the ones between Harper and me. She saw the affair. She saw what we planned to do before he changed his mind. She said she would tell your father. I tried to stop her from leaving that night. I grabbed her arm. She slipped on the riverbank. It happened too fast, too silent. I wanted to save her. I did, but the water took her before I could speak. Your father found her necklace days later. I told him Harper did it. I had to. He would have killed me if he knew. Forgive me, Claire. I silenced your sister, then your father, then myself. But truth does not drown forever. The paper fell from Claire's hand. She didn't realize she was crying until she tasted the salt of it. All this time, all the silence, the grief, the guilt. It had been built on an accident wrapped in fear. Her mother had killed her sister by mistake. Her father had killed a man in vengeance for the wrong sin. And Claire had lived her whole life in the echo of both. She looked toward the river. The current carried leaves and broken branches, dark and restless. Truth does not drown forever, she whispered, and for the first time, she believed it. Claire gathered the necklace, the letter, and the cassette tape, placing them inside her jacket. The rain softened, turning from a downpour to a mist. She stood at the river's edge and whispered her sister's name into the wind. Lily. The water rippled gently, as though answering. Claire closed her eyes. She wasn't sure if it was the rain or her mother's ghost that brushed against her cheek. Light, sorrowful, forgiving. But she knew this much. The story was no longer theirs to hide. It was hers to tell, and she would. The rain had stopped by dawn. A pale gray sun rose over Hollow Creek, and for the first time in decades, the town felt awake, uneasy, as if it sensed the air had shifted. Claire drove back through the quiet streets. Mud still streaked across, her hands in jacket, her eyes hollow from a night without rest. The cassette tape and the 2 letters lay on the seat beside her. She had wiped them clean, though the stains, mud, blood, or guilt, never really came off. Every building she passed seemed to look at her differently now. The grocery store where her mother used to buy lilies on Sundays. The post office her father once stood outside in his uniform, smiling for the local paper. All these places had been her world. Small, simple, safe. Now they felt like props in a play she'd been born into but never given the script for. And today, she was going to rewrite it. The police station stood where it always had. A square brick building with flaking paint and an American flag limp in the wind. She parked, gripping the envelope of evidence so tightly her knuckles ached. When she walked through the doors, heads turned. Hollow Creek wasn't used to surprise. It was the kind of town where everyone already knew the ending to every story. She went straight to the front desk. The young officer looked up, startled. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Claire set the envelope down gently, like laying flowers on a grave. "Yes," she said softly. "I need to report 3 deaths. My sister's, my father's, and a man named Richard Harper." Inside the interview room, the light was sterile, humming faintly. The detective, gray-haired, polite but wary, listened as she told everything, from the funeral to the attic tape to the river. She didn't cry. Not this time. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who'd rehearsed a truth too long denied. When she played the cassette, her mother's voice, her father's, her sister's final words, the detective didn't interrupt. He simply sat, pen still, head bowed. By the end, the silence in the room was heavy as the years she carried. He closed the file gently and said, "Miss Monroe, this won't bring them back." "I know," she whispered, "but it might let them rest." He nodded once, slowly. "We'll reopen the case." As she stood to leave, he added quietly, "For what it's worth, your father wasn't the only lawman who's buried things around here." It was a strange kind of comfort, knowing guilt was universal, that her family's ruin wasn't born from evil, but from being too human. Outside, the morning had turned gold. The sun pushed through the mist like a timid hope. Claire walked toward her car, every step lighter than the one before. For the first time, she wasn't running from the past. She was walking through it. She drove to the cemetery next. Her mother's grave was fresh, the soil still dark. Lily's older, the name carved shallow by time. She knelt between them. "I know now," she said softly. "All of it. And I forgive you." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and lilies. "I'm sorry, too," she whispered, "for letting silence grow between us, for being afraid to listen." She reached into her coat pocket and took out the silver heart necklace, Lily's, and laid it gently on her mother's headstone. Then she placed the cassette between both graves. "The truth belongs here," she said. "Not in the attic. Not in me." For a moment, she closed her eyes. She imagined Lily's laughter echoing through the halls of their old house, her father's hand steadying hers on a bicycle, her mother humming to the radio, sunlight in her hair. In her mind, they were all together again. Not perfect, but whole. Not healed, but honest. And that was enough. That night, Claire returned home to pack what little she cared to keep. The house felt smaller, lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. In the attic, she found the empty spot where the first cassette had been, the dust faintly disturbed around it. She smiled, almost gently. "Goodbye, Mom," she whispered. Then she turned off the light and walked downstairs, the floor creaking beneath her, not in warning this time, but in farewell. It had been 3 months since the day Claire walked into the Hollow Creek Police Department. 3 months since the town that had lived on whispers finally learned the cost of its silence. The papers called it the Monroe Mystery. Unearthed. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now spoke in hushed tones of pity. But Claire didn't read the headlines. She'd stopped needing other people's versions of the truth. Instead, she found herself in the rhythm of quiet mornings. Coffee steaming beside her notebook, a window cracked open to the sound of birds instead of rain, and the kind of stillness that didn't frighten her anymore. She'd sold the family home. The attic, the creaking stairs, the walls that held too much memory, all belonged to someone else now. She'd moved into a small cottage outside town, where the trees hummed softly in the wind. Every day she'd take long walks by the river, the same river that had once been her family's graveyard. But it felt different now. Gentler. The current no longer carried secrets. It carried forgiveness. One afternoon, as sunlight poured across the water, Claire sat by the bend where the sawmill's ruins lay hidden beneath vines and moss. She opened her notebook, running her fingers over the page. At the top she had written, "When silence breaks, a family story." It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a confession. It was a testimony, her mother's voice, her father's, Lily's, all woven together so the world would remember what happens when love hides behind fear. She began writing, her pen steady, her thoughts tender. Sometimes, silence feels like mercy, but the truth, even when it shatters, is the only thing that heals. A soft breeze lifted her hair. The light shifted, dancing on the river's surface like glass. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard laughter. Faint, airy, familiar. "Lily's," Claire smiled. "Hey, sis," she whispered. "I finished the story." A ripple shimmered across the water, as if in reply. As evening fell, she walked home. The cottage glowed warm in the distance, a single lamp burning in the window. Inside, the air smelled of chamomile and old paper. On the mantel sat 3 framed photographs. Lily, grinning with sunlight in her hair. Her father, holding his sheriff's badge. Her mother, eyes soft, the faintest smile playing on her lips. Claire lit a candle before them and whispered, "You're free now." Then she turned off the recorder on the table, the same cassette player from the school, repaired and clean. She'd been using it to record her story for an audio series she called Echoes of Home. Her mother's voice had once started it all. Now, her own voice would end it, and perhaps help someone else face their silence too. That night, the stars broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Claire sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the hum of crickets and the steady song of the river below. She thought about the word redemption, how it didn't mean erasing the past, but carrying it gently, like something fragile and holy. The tape recorder lay beside her, its red light glowing faintly. She pressed record one last time. Her voice, soft but certain, filled the night. This is for anyone who's ever lived in a house full of unspoken words. For anyone who's felt the weight of love that never found its voice. The truth will hurt, but it will also set you free. She paused, looking toward the river, where the moon's reflection shimmered like a heartbeat. And when silence finally breaks, she said, "You'll hear what forgiveness really sounds like." Then she stopped the recording and smiled. For the first time in her life, silence felt like peace.